Hey guys, my name is Matthew, and this is my review of The Push by Ashley Audrain. Here we go. The Push is a novel that is told from the perspective of Blythe, who is a mother, and she's not a particularly good one. We get this really hard story. It's multi-layered, and it's really about mothering, and it's about multi-generational trauma, and it's a pretty tough read, but it's an excellent read as well. In this review, I'm going to be giving some of my impressions of the novel, starting with some of the things that I loved the most about the novel and moving down through the list to some things that I did not love very much about the novel. At the very end, I'm going to give my recommendation, who is this novel written for? One of my favorite things about this novel is that it is literally one of the very best first-person narratives I've ever written. As far as the writing style goes, it is top tier. It's literally amazing. I don't know, this is what holds the whole book together, which is true of all books, I suppose, but sometimes it's like plot or character or other things. In this one, she's written the book so well. It's written in a first-person perspective, kind of a letter from Blythe to her husband Fox, and it outlines kind of the whole narrative of her. It's really focused on her mothering, and also at the same time it switches in the narrative back in time to her mother and her grandmother as well, and how they are as mothers. You'd think that would be really confusing, and the only time that's confusing is when it's intentional. Not only is the writing style really good, but it feels like every single part of this novel was written intentionally. Audrain just did a spectacular job of writing this book. The thing I think she did maybe the best, and part of the reason why this book is so well written, is because the unreliable narrator, which is actually a hard kind of trope to catch well. Normally in this trope, we see one of two failings. Normally it's either an unreliable narrator who actually is pretty reliable, or an unreliable narrator who is so unreliable that it's like not even a good read. In this book, we are constantly actually a little bit confused in a good way about whether or not Blythe is, I don't know, fully unreliable, how much of her story is true, but it's so well written. And at times I had to remind myself, actually, you know, she's talking about Violet, who is her first child, and you have to remember she's a child, and so our unreliable narrator is very unreliable. She's dealing with so many traumas from her own childhood and things she's currently going through, and it's, I don't know, really well written. Another thing I really liked is how thought-provoking this book is. It's uncomfortable and unappealing and hard, and it's like an emotional roller coaster the entire way. And even when you put down the book, you are still thinking about the book. I had a dream about this book. It's like weird how multi-layered this book is. The title itself, it has multiple meanings and layers in it as well. And yeah, it's really an emotional, just kind of wreck, but in such a good way. It's uncomfortable and unsettling, but on purpose, if that makes sense. Another thing I really liked about this book is the real depictions of mothering. So often we hear about the kind of fun, loving side of mothering, and it's so good and it's beautiful, and you know, that's true, but some of the graphic depictions of what mothering is really like is, I think, is a little bit of, not a breath of fresh air, that's not true. It was hard and a really hard read, and some of those depictions I'm sure would be really hard to read for a mother who's been through some of those things, but also I'm glad to see some of the realistic depictions of mothering. I also loved how readable this book is. There were times when I was literally telling myself, I actually don't want to keep reading right now. I need to take a break from this because it's so heavy. And yet I found it hard to put the book down. The pages seem to turn themselves, and even as I'm going, man, I don't want to find out what's happening next, at the same time I was saying I can't put this book down. A couple things I didn't like about this book as much. First of all, I'll say the ending, well actually I'll say this. I've seen this marketed as a thriller, and I don't think it's actually a thriller much at all. A psychological drama is definitely the better terminology for it. There are some thriller type aspects at the end, near the end of the book. easily the weakest part of her writing in this book is that end section with the kind of thrillers. So if you're into thrillers, the book isn't for you. So yeah, that's one thing I didn't love as much about it. It's kind of that thriller section at the end. And I will say the end also is kind of predictable, or at least I felt like it was predictable. And so I was let down because I thought she was gonna give us another twist to maybe make it something different, and then she didn't. And I went, oh, okay, well, that's fine. So it's kind of an open-ended ending that I didn't love. The other thing I didn't love so much about this book is the crazy number of triggers. I feel like the triggers were really heavy around abuse and neglect, and maybe it's because I have an 8-month-old daughter right now, but I feel like it was tough to read some of those things. Yeah, it was just a really tough read. So there's a lot of triggers around like a disintegrating marriage, abuse, neglect, and a lot of trauma type stuff that they're not hard to read in a graphic sense, but they're hard to read in a very emotional, like conflicting, unsettling way. Very uncomfortable read. So who is this book for? Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's incredibly, incredibly well written. In fact, if it wasn't so well written, I would have a hard time recommending it for anyone. I keep going back and forth between like a 2-star and a 5-star rating on this book because it was so unsettling and yet written so well. I would say that if you are an expecting mother, don't even come close to this book. Don't even bother with it. If you have dealt with abuse and neglect and those things are triggers for you, also don't bother with this book. But if you like kind of the emotional, psychological drama, if you are interested in that, then this is a great book for you. If you like your heartstrings being tugged in a few different directions and you're not sure who to sympathize with, you kind of sympathize with and hate someone at the same time, and you like that struggle and that turmoil, this might be a great book for you. Also, if you just want to see an example of a really well-written first-person book, first-person narrator, this book is well done. Like I said, maybe one of the best I've read. Audrain, I just want to say this is a great debut novel. Nice work on this one. This has been my review of The Push by Ashley Audrain. If you enjoyed this content, do feel free to like and subscribe, and as always, stay safe out there.